Thank you, Chairman, for those kind words of introduction. I thank the Lord God for giving me this opportunity to come to Colombo to present on this topic, and would like to thank the Army Chief and the entire team for the excellent hospitality and meticulous arrangements. Uh, my presentation would be on transnational challenges, disasters, state vulnerabilities in Southern Asia, a role of armed forces from an Indian perspective. At the outset, let me clarify, I don't belong to the armed forces. I'm a civilian academic, but I do work on armed forces issues. Secondly, I use the term Southern Asia because it has an encompassing view of what covers from Afghanistan down to Indian Ocean, because this by itself is a security complex by which we have to look into it. Thirdly, since time doesn't permit, I will be looking into transnational challenges from the category of human-induced threats, because transnational challenges can be taken in two categories. One is natural disasters and calamities, and the second will be in terms of human-induced threats, actually. Having said that, let me outline a few propositions as what constitutes this major challenge, and then I would go on to explore the nature and magnitude of transnational challenges and disasters, looking into state vulnerabilities, responses to transnational challenges and disasters, what kind of role the armed forces in Southern Asia do play, and I look into the Indian context and Southern Asia and conclude it with an assessment there. If we look into the age of globalization, the age of globalization is also the age of asymmetric conflicts. And today we find the scourge of transnational challenges and threats, mainly from human-induced sources, which are as high as natural disasters and calamities. Globally, transnational challenges and threats have been increasing in terms of transnational terrorism, insurgencies, conflation of crime and terrorism, threats emanating from terrorism in terms of cyber warfare, threats of the use of potential use of weapons of mass destruction, jihadi terrorism, and these have exponentially increased over a period of time. The Southern Asian region is basically emerging to be a high-risk prone region, even as transnational terrorist groups, insurgencies, and crime syndicates are operating all over the region there. With the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in South Asia, combined with the radical left insurgencies of the Naxalites and Maoists, the region is coming under severe peril as states and governments are coming under enormous political, social, civic, and military pressures. While there are prospects of economic development, the lethality of these threats is an overwhelming impact on these states. With the prospects of US NATO forces withdrawal from Afghanistan and the increasing assertiveness of the Taliban combined with the ISIS and Al-Qaeda threats to the Southern Asian region, there's a primary peril that comes to the region, and therefore the large question is, how can stability be restored in the region there? India has faced the earlier attacks of the Mumbai 2611 and the recent attacks in Gurdaspur and Punjab, and there have been numerous attempts both in India and Pakistan and elsewhere in Southern Asia, where we have the solid evidence of the probing attempts of jihadists to undermine state stability there. On the other hand, we find the Maoist and Naxalite insurgencies and a host of paramilitary insurgency groups in India's northeast, as well as the other countries of the region, pose severe and serious threats. And that is being complicated and compounded by the fact of transnational movement of small arms and light weapons, with transnational movement of narcotics closely associated with this irredentism there. And what kind of future threats will emerge in the region is that these groups are likely to engage in what I would call as hybrid warfare, possibly employing weapons of mass destruction, cyber, and other means of warfare that will be against the weaker states of Southern Asia. Next, I would like to look into the nature and magnitude of transnational challenges and disasters in the region there. Transnational security issues are emerging as key security challenges throughout the Asia Pacific. And transnational security issues can be defined as non-military threats that has cross-border effect that either threaten the political and social integrity of a nation, region, and the global order. Transnational threats emerge slowly and often do not elicit a focused or a timely policy response. And we have key transnational threats that include transnational crime, terrorism, maritime piracy, arms trafficking, illegal migration, infectious disease, and environmental degradation, among others there. And these transnational threats are likely to grow in severity and complexity, and they would be the dominant threats of the 21st century there. And as I mentioned earlier, we find that the magnitude of these threats are rivaling against each other, both in terms of natural disasters and human-induced threats there. Natural disasters in the transnational scope and human-induced threats have equal impact on the states and governments throughout the globe and also the Asian region there. Southern Asia has been impacted by the dual jeopardy of transnational threats, both of the human-induced and natural challenges. I think 10 years back, we had the Asian Tsunami that hit the whole region, and we've been having the increasing frequency of earthquakes and also various seismic activities within the region itself there. However, human-induced transnational challenges and threats in Southern Asia have been increasing more and more actually there. The common response has been the increasing proclivity to resort to military forces in tackling these transnational challenges and threats because they have turned out to be the primary response or responders to these threats and challenges there. The overwhelming preference of military forces in the region has been due to the fact that the capacity of the civilian agencies and the institutions to tackle these threats have been diminished and in some cases have been overstretched actually there. On the other hand, the resort to military forces results in overwhelming military preference of military forces over that of civilian agencies. That actually weakens governance by civilian agencies and reorients the military in terms of the training and operational tasks away from traditional military roles there. But let's look into how states do have vulnerabilities and how do they respond to these challenges there. The globalization, post-globalization state today is exposed to a variety of vulnerabilities. And the traditional framework of states and governments are inadequate to tackle them there. State vulnerabilities are wide in variety and to the transnational challenges and threats, and they are evident in the 5 following categories. Political, economic, civic, social vulnerabilities arising out of transnational terrorist and insurgent groups that have cross-border and inter-regional impact. Secondly, security and governance vulnerabilities due to the prospect of transnational crime, transnational threats, and insurgent threats. Thirdly, military security vulnerabilities due to the prospect of CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear weapons, by apocalyptic groups that have transnational radical agendas of anti-statist and anti-government agenda impacting on the physical security of states. Fourthly, economic and commercial vulnerabilities in terms of asymmetric economic warfare of exploiting financial, non-financial institutions and processes for terrorist financing and money laundering activities. Fifthly, information communication technology vulnerabilities in terms of attacking cybersecurity installations of the state, crippling state assets, and therefore they are also likely to jeopardize critical infrastructure of the state. What are the role of the armed forces in responses to transnational threats and challenges? Usually the armed forces are the second respondent to transnational threats and challenges, while the first respondents are the state civilian agencies. The armed forces normally supplement in most situations and in some cases do substitute civilian agencies because of the following advantages. Number one, they have effective command and control. Two, they have deployment of ground and tactical resources. Three, they have the deployment of aviation resources. Four, they have the ability to deploy task forces. Fifthly, they have the ability to deploy strike teams. And most importantly, sixthly, they have the ability to support and sustain logistics in these operations there. Also, armed forces are capable of immediate response, superior firepower and focused attack, and interdiction capabilities. Special operation forces are capable of tackling a wide variety of asymmetric, traditional, and WMD related contingencies there. Contemporary doctrines of the armed forces are today focused on what we call the military operations other than war that combines traditional, transnational, and non-military operations that cope with disasters which are in the category of natural and human-induced. And in the context of Southern Asia features states which have a security predicament, which have external rivalries and huge internal security challenges and threats that wreak havoc on the state fabric there. The weakest quotients of states in Southern Asia, including India, are the following. Number one, they have a deficit in terms of governance and development, governance and security processes. These are aggravated by the perils of transnational terrorism, insurgencies that have hugely attracted an overwhelming military response, but do not have the balancing processes of governance and development. Because unless you have governance and development accompanying this, any kind of offset in terms of the overwhelming use of military forces would be counterproductive there. The armed forces in Southern Asia are currently predominantly focused on internal security threats and challenges arising from transnational terrorist and insurgency threats. And as a result, today we find that the aid to civil authority has been transformed in their missions as an overwhelming part of the training, operations, and readiness of these armed forces. Besides, we find the armed forces have always been playing a very strong role in humanitarian and disaster relief missions, tackling a variety of natural disasters and calamities in the region there. Let's look at the Indian context in Southern Asia there. India contains the largest array of transnational threats and challenges that range from transnational terrorist threats, insurgencies, small arms, light weapon smuggling, inter alia with narcotics, and human trafficking there. Transnational terrorist groups do target India by their online radicalization programs that recruit the youth for the ISIS. India also has the largest military force in the region, diversely capable of handling a variety of transnational threats and challenges. The future portends to the multiple transnational threats that would impact on India and Southern Asia. Number one, it could feature attritional terrorist attacks from transnational groups that could be on the land and maritime domain. Two, rising threats of insurgencies. Three, transnational crime. Four, cyber attacks on states by asymmetric cyber warriors. As the perils of radical jihadist and leftist insurgencies surge in their momentum, attacking the state fabric and governance, today South Asian state institutions are increasingly relying on armed forces to address these complex threats there. However, there are finite limits in terms of the use and deployment of military forces in addressing these challenges because of the morphed complexity of transnational threats, terrorist threats, and insurgent threats, because such warfare today complicates any response actually there. India engages in the neighborhood with a comprehensive economic development packages, security convergence that aid and build capacity in terms of governance, development, and security paradigm of Southern Asian states. India has been adopting a cooperative security strategy that would be the pivot for enabling development and endeavoring and securing of Southern Asia. Very specifically, India has been focused through its initiatives of defense diplomacy and various programs like the Indian Technical Economic Cooperation that augments for capacity building of military and civilian staff of Southern Asian countries in various areas of counterterrorism, intelligence training, special operations, counter-narcotics operations, strengthening of cyber security, enhancing maritime security in the region, and more importantly, enhancing intelligence cooperation in the region there. India's role in the region is gaining importance, even it has engaged in extensive neighborhood diplomacy and economic cooperation. And that brings into focus the security convergence that India has with Southern Asia, even as transnational threats and challenges have multiplied and have increased. The recent Indian project of the Mawson project is not only in terms of economic and commercial connectivity, but also it provides a functionalist derivative of enhancing security cooperation within the region, and it states against the transnational threats and challenges. In conclusion, what does these threats do have for the future there? Transnational threats and challenges in the domain of natural disasters and calamities and the human-induced types are on the increase, threatening state capacity to confront, manage, and tackle them there. Southern Asia's weak security predicament is mainly in terms of governance capacities, development priorities, and security deficiencies, and thus it results in vulnerabilities to natural disasters and calamities, and also to the inevitable human-induced types of transnational threats and challenges. The imperatives therefore lie for a cooperative security mechanism among the Southern Asian states, because that is vital as transnational challenges and threats do require an augmented response. Regional security cooperation and capacity building in terms of civilian government agencies is vital to meet the challenges of transnational threats and challenges. The regional security cooperation and capacity building in terms of militaries of Southern Asia is vital to jointly combat human-induced threats of transnational terrorism and insurgencies in the region. Okay. Governance and responses to equitable development are vital, even as strategic asymmetric threats gather momentum in exploiting local situations. However, the most important imperative here is that human security that emanates from human development is perhaps the best derivative that could come, and that can come from good governance yielding to what we would call comprehensive security in the region there. And that needs a fine balance between a robust military force architecture that is well trained in traditional and non-traditional operations, contending transnational challenges and threats, that should also go along with good governance, with the actions focused on development, humane, social, and civic equity, and that would be a formidable force to tackle the radical transnational terrorism and spiraling insurgencies in the coming future. Thank you very much.